Okay, we're back. I was about to make a super lame 90s joke, and I didn't, so you are welcome, and I expect to see that gratitude in my student evals when you say, I'm not sure if she taught me anything, but at least she didn't make lame 90s jokes. So, that being said, let's talk about this one summer. Um, One thing that's interesting about this book is it does seem to split along gender lines when I teach it. It usually it's not one people hate, but it is one that tends to bore the male students more than the female students, which I find fascinating. One theory I have for this, and you feel free to disagree with me, I'm just sharing my theory, is we don't get very many stories of feminine puberty. Like, we don't get a lot of stories of young girls going through the stage from youth to adolescence, and that's part of the reason I teach this one. Uh, but because we don't get that story, we're not used to it, so it doesn't seem very compelling to us. It's not the story we've learned to seek out or read as representative of all adolescents in the same way that Harry Potter can sell billions of copies and girls and boys alike can see themselves in him. And that's one thing you want to pay attention to when we talk about what gets essentialized. That Harry's experience is read as gender neutral, but a book like this is not, is something to think about why we read that way. So, speaking of that kind of story, the Buildings Roman, all of our books, I'm pretty sure, fulfill this. I'd have to go back and double check. But it's very specific to this notion of how we go from child to adult. So, I should have put this in the slideshow, but there's a term called the limon, Limn, and it's the in between. And as you move through stages of life, you often have to go through the limon to get there. So, that moment where, and this is where the age difference between Rose and Wendy comes in, where Rose is a year or two older than Wendy, and so she's going into puberty, and Wendy's just not quite there yet. And when we start to look at young children, a year or two makes a huge amount of difference in terms of development. So Rose is fully in the limon, whereas Wendy is still on the cusp. And we can see, and this is obviously very gendered, but the very last page of the graphic novel, it can be read as dismissive or stupid, but the thing is, part of going from childhood to adolescence is the development of the body. It's the changes, it's looking forward to or anticipating what the adult form is going to look like. And so rarely do we get any conversations from young girls about their anticipation of it. And this leads to misunderstandings where people assume girls don't talk about this stuff, right? They don't talk about boobs, they don't talk about penises, they don't talk about vaginas or menstruation. And of course they do all of those things because that is their body. They want to talk about it, they want to know about it. And after everything that happens in this book, don't think that because it ends on boobs would be cool, that Rose isn't considering all the complexities of everything she said. And her looking forward to that can also be read as a response to the internalized misogyny she struggles with in regards to the dud and Jenny and all of that plotline. So that's just for thinking. The other thing about this book is it has a lot of post-colonial themes where Jenny's concerned. Anyone who's gone to a tourist town knows there's a drastic difference between being a tourist and living there. The closest I ever came, I lived in Las Vegas for 4 years, and there's a point after you start to live there that you're not a tourist anymore, and you do start to get irritated by tourists. And that gets even more extreme and more complicated when we move into something like a colonized town, right? Where Jenny is clearly supposed to be of Native American descent. We see that when she shows them around the Heritage House. And there's a lot going on there in terms of history, in terms of classism, and in terms of power structures. And so you get the throwaway moments where as they're coming in and the dad waves, but this notion of incoming sets up the difference between the kids who live and work there and the families that come for the winter. And you can also see the difference between the dad's seemingly harmless wave, right? He thinks of this as a wonderful place. He thinks of this as a place where his family has good memories. It is. But from their perspective, they aren't interested in him waving at him. They don't think of him as belonging there. And that disconnect matters in terms of where we position ourselves and how we see ourselves, what we see ourselves as entitled to. You also see it, and this is really tied to socioeconomics here, when the girls go where they're not supposed to, when they go off the beaten path, right? They move out of the tourist areas, which are well kept, which are clean, which is where all the money goes, and they go into this space where they know they're not supposed to be, but it's full of trash. It's broken down. Here's all the money, here's all the lack of money going back to the people of Owago Beach. And the thing about a graphic novel is the pictures obviously matter as much as the words, and you want to pay attention to those moments where things aren't said. So the white bars between each of the panels, each of the pictures, that's called the gutter. And as you read, whether you know it or not, your brain is animating between one panel and the next, and it fills in that space with all the action and thought that happens between one panel and the next. We quite call that the blood in the gutter. So as these girls are walking through here, what is the outside surrounding? Why are some things so clear and some things not? Where is the eye drawn, right? How are they positioned in the panel to draw your eye to specific details? And where do we have details that are left off to the side for you to see if you want to, but that can be easily overlooked? And the other thing about graphic novels that makes them interesting from a textual perspective is they can mimic all the things we don't see in real life. So you can blow by a panel and not notice anything exactly the same way you can walk across a beach and not notice anything. The other big theme here, and this is huge, especially for young girls growing up, sexism and discrimination, or the sort of stereotypes or essentialized notions that your gender or your sex set up what you're capable of. And I don't mean like boys can have babies. I mean men don't have emotion. Men are uber violent. Women are hysterical. Shit like that just isn't true. It just isn't true. But we still have these sexist beliefs that hem us all in. And one step past sexism, you get into misogyny. So this is when we move into murdering women, right? So this happens all the time. Young boy asked a girl to prom. She said no. He showed up at prom with a knife, stabbed her, and killed her. That was a few years ago. Those kinds of stories come out all the time. And when being turned down for a date leads you to murder someone, what we can see there from a cultural theory perspective is something else is happening. And that's not an isolated incident. It's not that there was just one disturbed individual that murdered this young girl. This happens all the time. You can Google it. So when it starts to occur with such frequency, then we can start to look at how, why is that? What is happening in our culture that makes this so common? For the girls, we see wrestling with the word slut, wrestling with the way that they judge the two girls, and obviously Rose gets a crush on the dud, but then we start to see this part where they learn the word slut and they're so judgy of the other women, right? And there are lots of cultural reasons for that, one of which is that in a lot of our narratives, women are set up to compete for male attention, so we can see that forming in Rose's jealousy over Jenny. We also see that they don't understand exactly what they're saying. They know slut is a bad word. They know it's not a nice word, but it's also not necessarily something that has any kick to it yet. And that's important because language is tricky. This is why people can call each other bitch when they're friends, and that's fine, but when someone you don't know screams bitch at you out of a car window, that gets really scary. And this is what we might call a splash page. So the action of the graphic novel slows down, and you can hear slut, 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 slut in the flip-flop as you see it there. And keep in mind, there is no such thing as a slut. It's not a thing. It doesn't matter how much sex you have, it doesn't matter how much sex you don't have. That is a cultural construct that we have created to decide who is worthy of respect and who is not. If I can label you a slut, then I no longer have to worry about treating you as a human being. That is a power move. That's also how language and ideology get connected, and why we have the sorts of hate speech laws that we do. And as the story progresses, we see them complicate that notion. So we see Rose blaming Jenny. We see Wendy recognizing it's not so simple. And that comes to a head here in this scene where Rose is so sure that Jenny is cheating, Jenny is lying, Jenny is a slut, and Rose doesn't want any part of it. And so, what is happening in Rose's development that is getting her to see, or teaching her not to trust Jenny? It's teaching her to see Jenny's behavior as typical, as she says. Those are things to think about. And last but not least, Rose's mom. This is a theme that I enjoy because there's no good way to get through this, right? When someone is suffering from extreme depression, it's hard on everybody. It's hard on them, it's hard on their family, and there's not much anyone can do about it. The dad has been living with this for a year. He is responding to her temper, he's responding to her withdrawal. At the same time, it's not like she can just make herself happy. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about depression. And when we get to the end of the story, we see why. What has been going on that led to this moment, and all the things that Rose didn't see about her mom. It doesn't justify it, but it does offer context. And with most realities that text represents, people are complicated. It's not that we can forgive or write off what they do to us, but it's worth understanding why they make the choices or engage in the behaviors that they do. And last but not least, my favorite panel of maybe in a graphic novel. Because you go through this entire book, and Rose and her mom are fighting on almost every page that they share together. And yet, when we get to the end, and Jenny's in trouble, and Rose is scared, she screams for her mom. And when she screams for her mom runs in the water. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't blink. We find out afterwards why she hasn't been in the water. But this moment is so rare to find in young adult because you get more conflict if the parents aren't particularly good at their jobs. So to have this moment where we see a mother and a daughter, a parent and a child who still work together, who still love each other, even if they're still fighting, pushing, and pulling against each other. So when you go to write your responses to this, these aren't answers to the text. What I'm saying to you isn't this is what the text means. These are ideas the text brings up that you can pay attention to, but tell me what you think about them. Don't tell me what the answer is. Tell me how reading this, why did it bore you? Why do you think it bored you? Or why did it speak to you? What about it do you think spoke to you? What themes jumped out at you? Why did they jump out at you? And maybe pick one, right? Here's one idea that jumped out at me, and I want to think about it because X, Y, and Z. Zero in on that and really focus on what you think and why, not what you think the answer to the reading comprehension question is. Okay.